For months, I had been drowning in HOA drama, constant notices about lawn length, mailbox paint, and the height of my fence. Every week, another letter would slide under my door with Linda S. signature, the HOA president who treated our peaceful neighborhood like her private kingdom. I couldn't even enjoy my backyard without feeling watched. One morning, after getting fined again for leaving my trash bins out 5 minutes too long, I snapped. I booked a flight to Hawaii right then and there. I needed the sound of waves, not HOA meetings. I needed quiet, not Linda's shrill voice reminding everyone about community standards. As I packed my bags, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of being unreachable for a week. No board meetings, no warning letters, no friendly reminders, just sun, sea, and peace. I even joked to myself, the only rules I'll follow this week are the airline's safety instructions. The next morning, I arrived at the airport early, feeling lighter than I had in months. I checked in, grabbed a coffee, and sat by the window, watching planes take off into the blue. For the first time in forever, I felt free. But freedom, as I'd soon learn, was short-lived. Because the moment I boarded that plane, I realized the HOA had followed me, literally. Right there in the first row, I saw the one person I never wanted to see again. Linda. As I stepped into the airplane aisle, suitcase in hand and boarding pass between my fingers, I felt that rare excitement of starting fresh. I smiled at the flight attendants, nodded at a few fellow travelers, and started looking for my seat, 12A, by the window. But then I froze. Sitting right in the very first row of the plane, legs crossed like she owned the cabin, was Linda, our HOA president. Her sharp bob haircut was perfectly in place, her floral blazer as loud as ever, and she was already lecturing a flight attendant about how the overhead compartments should be evenly shared for community harmony. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be. Of all the flights, of all the days, she had to be on mine. She noticed me immediately. Her eyes widened for a second, then narrowed into that same disapproving stare she gave when she once measured my grass with a ruler. "Well, well," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the boarding chatter. "If it isn't our neighborhood rule breaker." A few passengers turned to look at me. I forced a polite smile. "Morning, Linda. Small world, huh?" She smirked. "Some of us like to make sure standards are upheld, even in the air." I laughed awkwardly and moved toward my seat, but her words followed me like turbulence. I could feel her eyes on me as I placed my bag in the overhead bin. It was as if she was inspecting my every move, waiting to file another violation, this time for how I stowed my luggage. When the flight attendants announced to take seats and fasten seatbelts, Linda raised her hand like she was in another HOA meeting. "Excuse me," she said to the crew. "I just want to confirm that passengers are seated according to their assigned class and section. We wouldn't want any boundary issues." The crew exchanged confused glances, unsure how to respond. I sank into my seat, covering my face with my hand. The people around me started whispering, and one man chuckled, "She's acting like she runs the place." I whispered back, "She thinks she does." As the engines roared and the plane began to roll down the runway, I closed my eyes, trying to forget she was even there. But deep down, I had a feeling. This flight was going to be anything but peaceful. Because when Linda's around, there's no such thing as calm skies. The first half hour of the flight was surprisingly quiet. The seatbelt sign had just turned off, and I was beginning to think maybe, just maybe, Linda would keep to herself. I put on my headphones, ordered a cup of coffee, and leaned back to enjoy the view of clouds stretching endlessly outside my window. But peace never lasts long when Linda's around. Out of nowhere, a shadow loomed over me. I looked up, and there she was, standing in the aisle, hands on her hips like she was inspecting a crime scene. "That's my seat," she declared, pointing at me. I blinked, confused. "Your seat? This is 12A. I pulled out my ticket, showing her the number printed clearly in black ink. Linda scoffed. "That's supposed to be my seat. I always sit by the window. I spoke to the airline at check-in. The flight attendant, hearing the commotion, hurried over. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass? Linda handed it over with a flourish, as if she were presenting official HOA documents. The attendant checked it, then gave an apologetic smile. Your seat is 3C, ma'am. You're in business class. Linda crossed her arms. I chose to downgrade. I wanted to monitor the general section. It's good practice to understand community behavior. Several passengers chuckled. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" I tried to keep calm. Linda, this is assigned seating. Please go back to your... She cut me off. I don't take orders from people who violate mailbox color codes. That did it. The whole row erupted in laughter. Even the flight attendant bit her lip to keep from smiling. Linda's face flushed crimson, and she snapped, "This man is known for disturbing his community. He shouldn't be allowed to disturb this one, too." The flight attendant's patience was wearing thin. Ma'am, please return to your assigned seat. If there's an issue, we'll resolve it when we land. For a moment, I thought she'd argue again, but instead, she glared at me one last time and marched back toward the front, muttering something about respect and civic duty. I sighed in relief, leaning back in my seat. The woman next to me whispered, "What's her problem?" I smirked. "She's the HOA president where I live. She thinks she runs the world." The woman laughed. "Well, not this one. The captain's in charge up here." I smiled, sipping my coffee, because I had a feeling the captain might be getting involved sooner than anyone expected. It didn't take long for Linda to start again. Barely 20 minutes after the seat fiasco, her voice carried down the aisle like an emergency alarm. I turned my head, and sure enough, there she was, standing up in her seat at the front of the cabin, waving her hands as if calling an HOA meeting mid-flight. "Excuse me, everyone," she began, her tone as commanding as ever. "I think we need to establish some order here. There are passengers talking too loudly, overhead bins being misused, and frankly, this crew needs clearer leadership." The entire cabin went silent. The flight attendants froze, unsure whether to laugh or intervene. Linda continued, completely unfazed by the dozens of stares. "I'm the president of my homeowners association, and I know a thing or two about maintaining proper conduct. So let's make a few quick rules, shall we?" A man from row 10 muttered, "Lady, this isn't your neighborhood." She shot him a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "Decorum applies everywhere, sir, even in the sky." At that point, a flight attendant hurried over. "Ma'am, please sit down. The seatbelt sign will be on shortly. We're expecting turbulence." Linda scoffed. "I'll sit when I'm done addressing the passengers. Someone needs to take initiative since your organization seems to lack structure." The attendant tried again, more firmly. "Ma'am, this is a safety matter." Linda's voice rose, indignant. "Safety? I know all about safety regulations. I once rewrote our entire HOA handbook because someone placed a gnome too close to a walkway. Now please, let's stay on topic." At this point, half the plane was laughing, while the other half was recording on their phones. I slid lower into my seat, trying not to be noticed, but I couldn't help chuckling. Linda, still standing tall and proud, pointed toward the back of the plane. "From now on, talking should be kept to a reasonable volume. Keep your tray tables neat, and please, no reclining without permission from the person behind you. Community respect starts with..." Suddenly, the intercom clicked on, and the captain's calm voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to remind everyone that this is a commercial flight, not an HOA meeting. Please return to your seats and let our crew do their jobs." The passengers burst into applause. Some even cheered. Linda's jaw dropped. She looked around, as if expecting support, but all she got were amused smiles and a few sarcastic thumbs-ups. Her cheeks flushed bright red as she sat down, muttering under her breath. "People these days have no respect for authority." I grinned, whispering just loud enough for the person beside me to hear, "Finally, someone higher than the HOA president." The rest of the cabin laughed again, and for a moment, the tension broke. But deep down, I knew Linda wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The flight had grown oddly quiet after Linda's airborne meeting got shut down. Passengers whispered and chuckled, replaying her outburst like a viral moment in the making. A few people were already showing their seatmates the videos they'd recorded. I couldn't blame them. It wasn't every day your HOA president tried to take command of an aircraft. For about 10 minutes, things were calm. Linda sat rigidly in her seat, her arms crossed, glaring at anyone who dared look her way. You could tell she was fuming, silently drafting some kind of mental Sky Rules handbook. Then, just as the drink cart began to roll down the aisle, the intercom chimed. The captain's voice came through, steady, professional, and laced with just enough humor to cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We hope you're enjoying your flight today. Just a quick reminder that this is a commercial airline, not a homeowners association meeting." The cabin erupted in laughter. People clapped, cheered, even whistled. Someone shouted, "Tell her again, Captain!" Linda's face turned crimson. She sat up straight, huffing. "This is unprofessional. I will be filing a formal complaint." The flight attendant pushing the cart bit her lip, trying not to laugh. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" Linda snapped. "Water. Bottled. Room temperature. Not from a can." The attendant nodded, poured her a cup of ice water, and moved on quickly. I leaned toward the man sitting beside me and whispered, "Looks like she's losing altitude." He snorted so hard he nearly spilled his soda. Then, as if fate wanted to add a final touch of irony, a patch of turbulence shook the plane. The overhead lights flickered, and everyone grabbed their armrests. Linda shrieked, "This is exactly what happens when rules aren't followed." The captain came on again, calm as ever. "Nothing to worry about, folks. Just a little turbulence. We'll have smooth skies shortly. And please, remain seated, no matter what community position you hold." The laughter returned louder than before. Linda crossed her arms, staring daggers at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I felt free of her authority. Up here, the sky didn't care about HOA fines, bylaws, or petty rules. The only rule that mattered was gravity. And right now, it was on my side. I looked out the window at the endless clouds and smiled. Maybe the universe really did have a sense of humor. The laughter from the captain's announcement eventually died down, replaced by a soft hum of conversation and the rattle of drink carts. For a while, it felt like the flight might actually return to normal. I even closed my eyes, thinking maybe, just maybe, the chaos was over. But with Linda, peace was temporary. About an hour into the flight, a low rumble shook the cabin. The seatbelt sign dinged, and the plane began to tremble in light turbulence. The attendants calmly moved down the aisle, checking belts and securing carts. Most passengers took it in stride, except one. From the front row came Linda's voice, loud and panicked. "This turbulence is unacceptable. Who's in charge of maintenance on this aircraft?" Everyone looked up. The attendants tried to reassure her. "Ma'am, turbulence is normal. It's just weather. Nothing to worry about." Linda wasn't having it. "Nothing to worry about? I could sue for unsafe travel conditions. If this were my HOA, we'd have a safety inspection every week." Her voice rose with every word. The plane jolted again, and she grabbed the armrest, shouting, "I told you people, structure prevents chaos." A man 2 rows behind her muttered, "Lady, it's the sky, not your cul-de-sac." The cabin erupted with quiet laughter, but Linda spun around in fury. "Excuse me, I happen to take leadership seriously. Someone has to maintain standards." I couldn't help it. I started laughing too. Not loud, but enough that she heard. Her head whipped toward me like a hawk spotting prey. "Oh, you think this is funny, don't you?" she snapped. "You never respected order back home, and now you're mocking safety procedures in flight?" I raised an eyebrow. "Linda, you can't find the weather. Relax." Gasps and giggles rippled through the rows. Even the attendants were trying not to smile. Suddenly, the plane shook harder. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. This will pass shortly." But Linda was already standing, against direct orders. She stumbled toward the aisle, yelling, "Someone needs to talk to the captain immediately. This flight lacks proper management." One of the attendants gently blocked her path. "Ma'am, you must sit down now, for your safety." Linda froze, trembling, not from fear, but from sheer rage at being told what to do. She glared at the attendant and hissed, "You people don't know real leadership. Back in my community." Then the plane jolted again, harder this time, sending her wobbling. She grabbed the nearest seat back, mine. Her manicured nails dug into the fabric as she tried to steady herself. I looked up at her, deadpan. "Guess gravity just voted you out, Linda." The man beside me burst into laughter so loud that half the cabin joined in. Even through the turbulence, the sound of amusement filled the air. Linda glared at everyone, clutching the seat like it was her last shred of power. "You'll all regret this mockery," she shouted, then finally collapsed into her chair, fuming and silent. As the plane smoothed out, the captain came on one more time. "Turbulence is over. Thanks for staying seated, everyone. And special thanks to those who didn't try to take command of the aircraft." I smiled to myself, staring out the window. The clouds below looked calm again, peaceful, almost like a quiet neighborhood. Except this one had no HOA. The cabin slowly settled back into calm. The turbulence passed, and the soft chime of the seatbelt sign turning off echoed through the air. Passengers sighed in relief, shaking off the adrenaline of the last few minutes. But not Linda. She sat stiff as a statue, fuming silently, her lips moving as if she were drafting an official complaint in her head. I thought the drama was finally over. I really did. Until the universe decided to hand me one more surprise. It started when the flight attendant came by offering snacks. "Peanuts or pretzels?" she asked cheerfully. Linda immediately interrupted. "Neither. Those are choking hazards, unacceptable options." The attendant gave her a polite smile and moved on, but Linda wasn't done. She stood up again, turning toward the rows behind her as if she were addressing her HOA board. "You know, this airline reminds me of my neighborhood. No accountability, no proper communication, and certain people—" She looked right at me, her finger practically trembling. "Don't follow the rules anywhere." A few people groaned. Someone muttered, "Here we go again." I kept my voice calm. "Linda, maybe sit down. You're disturbing everyone." Her eyes widened in fury. "Oh, I'm the problem? You're the one who ruined our community with your unapproved backyard construction." The words echoed through the cabin. My head snapped up. She'd just said what? The passengers nearby perked up. Someone whispered, "Wait, what did she just say?" I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "So it was you," I said slowly. "You're the one who denied my backyard renovation permit?" Linda crossed her arms, chin high. "Of course it was me. You thought you could build that pool without HOA approval? Not under my watch." The cabin went dead silent. Every passenger around us froze. Then the whispers began. She admitted it. "Wow, that's messed up. You can tell she's power hungry." Someone even started recording again. Linda realized too late what she'd done. Her face turned pale, then red, as murmurs spread through the plane like wildfire. I sat back, smiling faintly. "Well, thank you for the confession, Linda. I've been wondering who filed that anonymous complaint. Guess it wasn't so anonymous after all." The passengers around us laughed quietly. One man leaned over the aisle and said, "You got her good, buddy." Linda huffed, flustered, her voice cracking. This is harassment. You're all ganging up on me." But it was too late. Everyone had heard it, the secret she'd kept hidden for months. the petty power move that had caused me endless frustration back home. And now it was out, 30,000 feet above the ground, in front of 180 witnesses. For the first time, Linda didn't have a rule book to hide behind. She just sat there, red-faced and silent, staring straight ahead as the plane hummed softly through the clouds. And I couldn't help but smile. The sky had just delivered poetic justice. The rest of the flight was filled with that strange, tense quiet that follows a public meltdown. Nobody said much, but everyone felt the awkward energy radiating from Linda's seat like static. Every time a flight attendant passed by, Linda straightened her posture and muttered something about unprofessionalism and conduct reports. I, on the other hand, leaned back and enjoyed every second of the peace she couldn't control. After all, her biggest secret had just been announced to an entire cabin of strangers. No HOA bylaws, no closed-door meetings, no power to spin the story. Just truth at cruising altitude. As the hours passed, the captain's voice eventually came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." People stirred awake, stowed their trays, and stretched their arms. But Linda, she started preparing documents. Yes, documents. She pulled out a little folder labeled HOA Board Materials, flipped it open, and began scribbling furiously. Every so often she'd look up and glare in my direction, as if she were already drafting a lawsuit or another fine notice. For in-flight disrespect, probably. As the plane tilted into descent, she suddenly stood up again. "Excuse me," she called out to the flight attendants. "I'll need to speak with the captain immediately upon landing. I have several complaints regarding passenger behavior, turbulence, and snack quality." The lead attendant smiled professionally, though her patience was clearly worn thin. "Ma'am, please sit down until we've fully landed." Linda sighed dramatically and sat. Hard. But she kept muttering under her breath the entire way down. Then came the landing. The wheels hit the runway with a heavy thud, jolting the cabin. Cheers and applause broke out, a tradition on long flights. Everyone clapped and smiled, except Linda. "This flight has been chaos," she declared loudly, standing before the seatbelt sign even turned off. "I will be contacting airline management, the FAA, and possibly federal court." Someone behind me muttered, "You forgot God," and laughter rippled through the rows again. The seatbelt sign dinged, and chaos truly began. Linda grabbed her bag from the overhead compartment and started pushing her way toward the front, barking orders as she went. "Everyone stay organized. Don't rush. We'll disembark in order. I'll direct you." The irony was almost poetic. After all that, she still couldn't resist trying to lead a group she didn't belong to. As I stood waiting to exit, one of the attendants leaned toward me and whispered, "Does she really act like that all the time?" I chuckled. "You have no idea." But what none of us expected was that Linda Ice drama wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because as we stepped into the terminal, a group of airport security officers was already waiting at the gate. And they weren't there for me. The cabin door finally opened, and that familiar rush of airport air filled the plane. People were eager to get out, stretching and chatting as they stepped into the jet bridge. I grabbed my bag and joined the slow-moving line, relieved that the chaos was almost over. Almost. As soon as we stepped into the terminal, I noticed 3 uniformed airport security officers standing by the gate. They were scanning the disembarking passengers, holding clipboards and earpieces. I didn't think much of it, until one of them pointed. At Linda. "Ma'am," one of the officers said politely, stepping forward. "We'd like to speak with you for a moment." Linda stopped dead in her tracks, clutching her handbag like a shield. "Excuse me? Me? What is the meaning of this?" The officer kept his tone calm. "We received multiple reports from passengers and the flight crew about some disturbances during the flight." The entire crowd slowed to watch. People exchanged knowing glances, some even pretending to check their phones while secretly recording. The scene was cinematic. Linda, the self-proclaimed queen of order, being confronted by actual authority. She sputtered. Disturbances? I was maintaining order. That plane was chaos before I stepped in. The second officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, several reports indicate that you stood during turbulence, ignored crew instructions, and disrupted other passengers. That's ridiculous, she snapped. I was protecting everyone's safety. These so-called passengers were mocking me. She pointed toward the crowd, right at me. The officer followed her finger, his eyes meeting mine briefly. Sir, were you involved in this incident? I shrugged calmly. Only as an unwilling participant. She's the HOA president from my neighborhood. It's kind of a long story. A wave of laughter swept through the watching passengers. One woman called out, "Tell them about the in-flight HOA meeting." Linda gasped, horrified. "You're all exaggerating. I'll be filing complaints against every one of you." The lead officer sighed. "Ma'am, let's step aside and discuss this privately." He gestured toward a nearby security office. Linda tried to argue, but when she saw that he wasn't budging, she straightened her blazer and huffed, "Fine, but I expect to speak with whoever's in charge." The officer smiled faintly. "That would be me, ma'am." As they led her away, the crowd began clapping. Softly at first, then louder. The sound echoed down the terminal. Passengers who had suffered through her rants were now cheering her exit like the end of a bad movie. I caught the eye of one of the flight attendants who'd walked off behind us. She grinned. "Well," she said, "that's one passenger we won't be seeing again." I smiled back. If only I could say the same about my neighborhood. But deep down, I knew something had changed. Because the moment that plane touched down, so did Linda's power trip. And for once, she wasn't the one writing the report. The scene in the terminal became the stuff of legend. As security escorted Linda away, the passengers she'd spent the entire flight lecturing couldn't help but record the moment. Phones were out, flashes went off, and murmurs followed her down the corridor like a trail of justice finally catching up. I lingered for a moment, watching through the glass as she tried to explain herself to the airport officers. Her arms flailed in every direction, pointing, gesturing, defending, exactly like she did in every HOA meeting back home. Except this time, nobody had to listen. By the time I reached baggage claim, the story had already taken flight of its own. A teenage passenger who'd been sitting near Linda posted the videos online under the title, "HOA Lady Tries to Run an Airplane." Within an hour, it was blowing up on every platform. Comments poured in from strangers laughing, sympathizing, and even sharing their own HOA horror stories. When I landed in Hawaii later that day, my phone was buzzing nonstop. A few neighbors had already seen the viral clip and messaged me in disbelief. "Is that Linda from our HOA?" One text read. "Bro, she's trending worldwide," another said. For the first time in months, I laughed freely. No stress, no letters, no petty fines. Just pure satisfaction. A few days later, as I sat on the beach watching the sunset, I got an email from the HOA board. Subject line, "Urgent Meeting Update." The message was short and sweet. "Effective immediately. Linda has stepped down as HOA president due to personal circumstances. A new election will be held next week." I couldn't stop smiling. The sky had given me the justice the HOA never could. When I returned home a week later, the neighborhood felt different. Lighter, quieter, peaceful. No one measured lawns, no one checked mailboxes. And for once, there were no friendly reminders taped to doors. A neighbor waved as I pulled into my driveway. "Hey, I saw that video. You handled her perfectly." I laughed. Guess gravity finally did its job. From that day on, Linda's name became legend in the community, a cautionary tale told at barbecues and block parties. People started jokingly calling that flight the HOA Express. And me? I finally got my backyard pool permit approved. No resistance, no red tape. It was as if the entire board had decided I'd been through enough turbulence already. As I floated on the water under a quiet sky, I could not help but think back to that flight, where the one woman who ruled my neighborhood tried to rule the clouds, and got grounded by reality instead. Because sometimes karma doesn't come knocking at your door. Sometimes it comes cruising at 30,000 feet and lands perfectly on time.